r/AskReddit. What was the last straw that caused you to end your relationship with a significant other? He was fired from an extremely lucrative position for drinking on the job. We'd moved 3 states over for his job, to a city he'd lived before, and I managed to secure a position in my chosen field as well. He'd been clean and sober for years, but he started drinking again to cope with the stress. He was horrifically abusive when he drank, starting off with shitty comments and insults, which escalated to all-night screaming rages, breaking things, almost exclusively my things, and then he started talking to other women, via text and various apps. He convinced at least 2 of them that we were divorcing, and that he'd take care of them. Laughable, because he could barely take care of himself. The evening of the day he got fired, he started pushing me around in the kitchen, pushed me into a wall, actually, and pulled a gun on me. He was blackout drunk, and I thought he'd sober up and be okay the next day. I was working from home the next day, on the phone with a client, and he came running into the room I was in, jumped on top of me, punched me in my face, black eye, broken nose, and snatched my phone. I got my phone back, took the dog outside, and called the cops. After they took him away, I packed up, found an apartment, and got out of there before he could bond out. He's been trying to get in touch, promising he'll never do it again, can't live without me, etc. The thing is, he will. And eventually he'd probably have killed me. I'll be damned if I go out like that. Edited, because so many people mentioned a restraining order. The DA's office took care of that for me. I was granted a TRO and then a permanent at the first hearing, which I did not have to attend. I've had a carry permit for almost 20 years, and I have several handguns, all of which I both know how to use and take to the range for practice regularly. I'm also, by nature, vigilantly attentive to my surroundings and my gut instincts. Thank you for all your kind words and observations, and Silver. I wouldn't let my worst enemy be treated like that, let alone allow myself to live that way. He wasn't working. I was working 16-hour days to make ends meet. I got home from work one night around 3 AM exhausted. He was up waiting, wanting to pick a fight about something stupid. I looked at him and said, I'm exhausted, I've been at work since 10, can we do this tomorrow? He just wouldn't stop talking. I had like an out-of-body experience where I was looking at us and I realized it was never going to change. It was never going to get better and life was too short to be this unhappy. I was only with him because we were together 10 years, but honestly the last 5 were miserable. So I got up off the couch and just said I'm done and went to bed. He started yelling, I'm not done talking to you. I said, you don't understand. I said, I'm done. I'm done with us, and you need to find a new place to live, because I'm moving out of this house and you will be homeless. He didn't believe me. I contacted the landlord, broke the lease, got a new house, and had to call his brother from another state to come get him, so he wouldn't be homeless. Edited. Thank you for the gold and silver. I've had to explain he wasn't a monster. I was lucky compared to a lot of women. He didn't abuse me. He didn't cheat. I just wasn't happy. For a long time I didn't think just being unhappy was a reason to leave. I called his brother because I needed him to be someone else's responsibility so that I wouldn't cave, as I had done before, and I could just move on knowing that he was at least with his family. Was in volatile on/off again relationship with a guy who also happened to be a coworker when we were in our 20s. I was in love with him and wanted a firm commitment. He was wishy-washy and liked playing games. I tolerated it for over a year, mostly because I was also very attracted to him. Then, one day, I found out my brother got HIV. He was okay health-wise and was diagnosed before it got worse, but we were still devastated. I sat at home crying and just wanted to be comforted. I called the guy, told him about my brother, and he said, sorry, that sucks. He then immediately launched into a story about how he was at the mall and a woman asked for his phone number. That moment was my last straw. Here I was, pouring my heart out about my sick brother, and this guy was trying to make me jealous about some woman at the mall. This sounds weird, but even though he had been shitty to me for over a year, it took him being shitty about my brother for me to finally see he wasn't a good guy for me. She used to constantly threaten to break up with me. Whenever there was a fight, let's just break up then. I was young and stupid, so I would forfeit the fight to keep the relationship. One day we drove out to Winners and a nice waterside restaurant. She was making snide comments the entire day. You know, with your next girlfriend, you should hold her hand more. Things like that. Well, we went to my uncle's place who lived on a house on the water and we were gonna grab food for dinner. We park the car and she goes, "We should just split. Let's have dinner with your uncle and then we take a break." For some reason I got mad that she wanted to break up with me then eat dinner with my uncle, who is my godfather and one of my favorite people in the world. I told her that she doesn't get the privilege of eating with him and drove home that night. Ended it myself. She tried to get me back and I said no. We lived together. He told me that if the house wasn't spotless when he got home, that he would get rid of one of my pets, so choose one now. He had a breakdown and I dedicated everything into helping him recover, walked on eggshells around him for over a year, etc. And once he felt better he was angry that I had ended up depressed because of all that and wasn't doing as good a job with household stuff. I didn't have an unreasonable number of pets. I had 2 cats, a frog, and an aquarium with some fish. I use the cats as my emotional support and the aquarium as my stress relief. He decided that they were the reason that I wasn't keeping things perfectly spotless, so he was going to eliminate them one by one until I was back to normal and keeping everything clean, having dinner on the table when he got home, etc. Kept buying/using benzos behind my back after he would be clean for months and doing well just to ruin it again. Has a history with abusing heroin and Xanax. Told him he had one more chance and he blew it by accompanying me to my family function on the 4th of July, which was a 3-hour drive under the influence. Didn't know he took anything till we were 30 minutes away and I recognized his weird word slurring/mumbling and drowsiness. He was supposed to drive the second half of the way and even got mad at me for not letting him drive as he was dipping out every 5 minutes in the seat next to me. He's very scary and creepy under the influence of those kinds of drugs, and every time he got high it genuinely gave the illusion that he was possessed and the person I know him to be was temporarily absent/suppressed. Addiction is scary and it sucks. He was always spending time playing video games with his internet friends while I sat around bored at his place doing nothing, or at my place doing nothing. I made the first friend of my own that year, the first friend I'd made in a while, and suddenly he was jealous and he never spent time with me and I wasn't allowed to have friends and he had to look through my phone and read our texts cause I could be talking bad about him or cheating. No. After over a year of being ignored and put on the back burner, I was done. This is the same guy that I gave a second chance to after he cheated on me, and the same guy that was unemployed for 2 years while I supported us after he got fired for being lazy and was always late. I did way too much compromising and wasted 5 years of my life on him. Here is one from 2014. I was dating a beautiful man from Trinidad for a few months. Things were going great, and he was saying all the right long-termy things. He invited me to a camp out in the brutal Texas summer with people he knew. He couldn't be bothered to organize anything, or bring any supplies or food, so I did. I'm a perpetual overplanner, and I didn't mind carrying the responsibility over his birthday weekend. I put up the tent, and brought coolers of groceries. He tells me that, because it was his birthday weekend, he didn't want to hang around our camp all weekend, but wanted to flit about and be social. Disappointed, I said okay. Before he left I told him I wanted to cook him a birthday dinner that night. He waved me off and left. I started preparing dinner and needed to buy more ice. While standing in line to buy ice bags, I see him in the swimming pool with some random topless chick with her legs wrapped around him. I walked over, made eye contact and just shook my head at him before I walked away. Back at our camp I paused for 2 minutes and ask myself if I was overreacting. No way, I thought. I packed up the tent and put all the coolers in my car. I drove away less than 24 hours into what was supposed to be a 4-day camp out. No idea how he managed the rest of the time, but it was no longer my problem. This was one of the last straws of many, but during the summer, I usually pick up a lot of slack in our family business by working in our wood shop. It was a Saturday in July and we were swamped with work, had a deadline to meet, and 1 or 2 of my employees didn't come in. My ex used to occasionally work with us to pick up some money, and since he was scraping by and on summer break from college, I asked him if he wants to spend the day with me in the shop and make some money. At this time, I was paying for literally everything. He says no. I just want to stay home and play some video games. I worked 12 hours that day in the humid ass heat lifting heavy ass shit when, with his help, it cold been like 10 hours. I got razzed by my uncles for having a sissy of a boyfriend all day. And then, to top it all off, at the end of the day, he says, "Well, are you gonna come over? I want to have sex, and I'm kinda hungry." Fuck you, Steve. In college, over summer break my girlfriend of about a year worked at a camp in New York while I was in MD at my own job. Distance got hard, what with us being so apart, but she started really drifting away, not answering simple "are you doing okay?" texts for days, never calling or asking how I was. Real abnormal behaviors for her. She blamed it on bad internet, being out in the woods at camp and all, but I could regularly get through with another friend at the camp, so I knew she was bullshitting me. Out of nowhere, she calls and asks to talk. I figured she'd called to leave me, but instead she tells me she likes this other guy at camp, but still wants to date me, and that she just wanted to let me know she might pursue it while we're apart. After about a year of her barring me from talking to anyone else but her, and suddenly asking my permission to pursue another man on the side, I ended it then and there. Found out from my friend at camp she burned all of the things I'd given / loaned her, including about $50 of books. His behavior got increasingly bizarre. For instance, he would pop up at random places he knew I would be without telling me. Like, I'd mention I was picking up food at a restaurant on my way home. We never lived together, thank God, and I'd walk in to find him sitting there. He'd throw a tantrum anytime he knew I was spending time with friends or family without him. If I hosted a girls' night, he'd insist on staying so he could say hi. If I was on the phone in front of him, he'd yell, laugh really loud, or dance around to get my attention. He was 25 at the time. He started wearing a wedding band when we were never married or engaged. At this point in our relationship, I actually hated his guts. But the last straw was when he kept shooting shit. He was trying to get a job in law enforcement, and part of that required weapons training. He failed when he shot at the floor near his colleague's foot. Then he took the gun back to his place, which was his friend's basement, where he cleaned it while loaded, and shot up the walls. He kicked him out, and I refused to let that madness in my place, so long story short, he had to go for good. Edit. 2 years after our breakup he called me from an unknown number to ask me to be a job reference. He was applying to a law enforcement program in another state. I said no. We were doing the long distance thing, both living out of our home state. He went home for a few weeks, so I drove 12 hours to surprise him. Called him that afternoon to see if he'd like to hang out, and he claimed he had to go to his niece's soccer game. First time he'd ever mentioned going to one of her games, not like it was a habit, or that he regularly spent time with her family. Okay, no problem, I'll catch up with other friends. Asked if he'd like to get together tomorrow. Nope, he has to go mattress shopping with his mom. He didn't sound the least bit interested / excited that I was home. After that second excuse, it all just hit me like a ton of bricks. We hadn't seen each other in months. Phone calls had been getting sporadic and boring, and I honestly hadn't felt anything real for him in a couple years. Broke up with him over email, cause I'm a chicken who hates confrontation. Woke up the next morning feeling absolutely incredible. Never looked back. He came home drunk and couldn't get inside. Thought I'd locked him out. Started banging on the door. Neighbors threatened to call the cops. I was asleep and the noise woke me up, so I came to open the door and let him in. Turned to walk back to bed and he shoved me hard on the floor. I landed hard on my right hip, elbow and head. He then stood over me screaming that because I locked him out he had to be loud and now everyone is going to think we are trash. I said nothing, just covered my head with my arms and cried and hoped he went away. I was terrified he was going to kick me in the face. He finally stormed off and I crawled out to the elevator and went down and had the night doorman call the police. He came looking for me in the lobby just as the cops arrived. They made him leave and escorted him elsewhere. That's the last time I saw him. I left later that morning before he returned. He had never ever laid a hand on me before, but was becoming more emotionally abusive, but I was becoming wise to it and standing up for myself. I think that's why he did it. He was mad he couldn't manipulate me anymore. Long story but here we go. He was depressed. I don't know if he had been since before we met or that it started during. He had a troublesome relationship with his family, was never accepted etc. I didn't quite fit in and that didn't help. They treated him like shit. But they all clicked together, so they were never the ones to blame. An example, they went on family holiday every year, all together. My ex was extremely allergic to animals, pine trees, Christmas trees, basically any animal or plant with floof. On top of that he had severe asthma, to worsen any allergy attack. Every year they went to the mountains, with pine trees galore. Every year, his brother, his sister and his aunt refused to put their dogs in a kennel, resulting in him having severe allergies for an entire week from having 3 dogs around. On top of that they all smoked indoors, and when asked to please go outside, they said he could also just go outside. I tried to mend it, but it was like beating a concrete wall. After a year his mom's cancer returned. That was when his depression kicked in, or revealed itself or something. His grades went down, he dropped out in his final year of college. Stopped showering, didn't take care of himself anymore. The only thing he did all day was play games on his PC. At that point I was studying to become a paralegal, worked on the weekends, and did all the housework, because he said that doing our finances and working a shitty job was more than enough to balance it all out. It bothered me, but I'd chosen him, and love for me is the classic for better or worse. Anyway, at some point we started fighting more often. He would get furious with me in an unreasonable way, to the point where I questioned my sanity. Right before Christmas we got a message in the family group chat about the annual mandatory Christmas dinner. It'd be hosted by his niece and her boyfriend and they just put a new floor in. They told me I wasn't allowed to wear heels, because it would damage the floor. Now I'm a Carrie Bradshaw type of girl, matching her outfits, and wearing high heels exclusively. I responded by telling them that I would gladly leave my shoes at the door, if the dogs would stay at home, and the Christmas tree would be plastic. They all ignored the message, but my ex called me up. He ranted and raved. He told me I was being stupid. That I was only trying to cause a riot for my own little fun and laughter. That I had never been there for him. I was only out to give him a hard time. I had been waiting, hoping for 5 years, that the man I fell in love with would someday come back from that cloud of depression. In that moment I knew that would never happen. I remember thinking those words created a wound that could never be mended. For me the relationship was over at that moment. I sat through the Christmas dinner barefoot, silently saying goodbye to all of them, because I knew it'd be the last time I'd see them. This was the last straw in a giant pile, but when he stayed home from work, because he was sick he had a head cold, he was just a huge baby anytime he didn't feel 100% on my days off. I worked weekends, so I always had my days off in the middle of the week. He worked a regular Monday, Friday and I loved having the house to myself on those days. He camped out in the living room, in the dark, and demanded complete silence, unless it was broken by him complaining. wouldn't move into the bedroom or a guest room, so I was just wandering around the house being bored as hell because I couldn't do any chores or even watch TV. I ended up going for a walk just to get away from him, and I realized I did not want to go back to that house. I also realized I felt like that whenever he was home, sick or not. I couldn't stand to be around him. I still took a couple days to really think about it before telling him I wanted a divorce, but that was my breaking point. She gambled 10k plus behind my back over about a year. We share finances and I didn't really pay attention. I just knew we were never getting ahead and saving any money. I wondered how our friends who made similar money could afford kids, houses 3x as big, and vacations. I felt worthless and that everything I'd worked for wasn't good enough because we were still always broke. This went on 4 years, and realistically probably much more than 10k. That's just where I stopped adding it up and ended it. Worst part is it's 2 years later, and I still love her and would do anything to get her back. Even though her gambling got even worse and now she's tens of thousands in debt. Every time I try to help her she gets angry and defensive and says all I care about is money. I just don't want to live paycheck to paycheck for the rest of my life. I've dated other girls and they are all great, but they are not her. I moved to a new state to go to school, which obviously complicated an already strained relationship. We'd been together for 3 years, and I told him I didn't want to get married until after college. I didn't want to distract myself from school because I moved. He insisted on marriage to keep me faithful to him, but he was unwilling to move with me. He had an amazing career as an auto mechanic at tiny shop and prioritized that over my education and goal of attending law school. I declined the proposal and ended the relationship a week later. It's been 6 months since then, and he still refuses to mail me my bucks. Ugh. Side note, his mother and I could hardly stand each other due to differences in religious faiths, so I'm so glad to be rid of her judgment. When his depression excuse to be controlling and manipulative started and fueled my own anxiety and depression. After several months of living together, being the sole money earner, he had 4 jobs in 6 months. The longest he lasted was 2 weeks. The shortest was a day after putting through his paperwork in a flat I could barely afford that he specifically wanted. I tried to cut myself. He helped get me to a hospital, promising to do anything he could to help me. All he ever did was say what he would/could do, never actually put anything into action, but refused to get help for his own issues until I had got better. I saw 2 psychiatrists who listened to my whole story, then basically asked why the hell I was still with this guy. The line that stood out was, "This person's own unhappiness is making you want to kill yourself. That's not right." After that, I took a day away from him and realized what they were saying was true, and that for either of us to try get better, we needed to separate completely and work on ourselves as individuals. It hurt a shit ton, but now I can look back and see all sorts of signs of emotional abuse and emotional blackmail, and everyone I know is so happy I've been able to step away from this on my own. I met my husband when I was 16, pregnant at 17 with the first, and married a month after she was born and I turned 18. Had 2 more kids over the course of a 14-year relationship. Many times I caught him behind my back talking to other women, not just as friends, including his ex-wife who he planned on leaving me for at one point when my youngest was still a baby, and lied to my face about it. There were so many women though. There was also the manipulation, the emotional abuse, the gaslighting. I didn't see any of it because I was stupid and loved him. But I think the last straw was when I landed myself a week-long stay in the hospital for an overdose. I have borderline personality disorder, not an excuse, just for clarification. I had found out he'd gone and spent the day with another married woman and lied to me about it. The entire week I was in the hospital, nearly died, wasn't waking up, and then the following couple weeks I spent in the psych facility. He was shacking up with this other woman, never bothered to come visit me, and it still took me another 2 years to leave. Because I loved him. Because it was for the kids. I dealt with his alcoholism for those 2 years. Repeatedly checked himself into a local mental facility, went to the hospital numerous times, one of which he was so drunk it took nearly 24 hours for his blood alcohol level to come down enough to be allowed to be admitted into the mental hospital, and another time he punched a cop in the face and spent the night in jail. I never was able to trust him again after the hospital incident, and I couldn't move past it, and eventually I just had enough of all of it. Therapy didn't help. Medication didn't help. I finally figured out that the best thing for the kids is to see their mom happy, not always stressed out and depressed and so riddled with anxiety that I couldn't get out of bed some days. I'm still dealing with some custody issues and a lot of stuff I won't put here, and waiting for the divorce to be settled, but eventually things are gonna get better. GF of 5 years that I met in college at a house party I was throwing after my band played. We hit a few rough patches, particularly the semester before she graduated. I was a year older as graduated a semester before as I did an extra semester to get a minor. We took a long break because she was planning on going to Italy for a year starting the summer after graduation, and she wasn't sure she wanted to stay together. After we decided like a year prior we'd stay together when she went overseas, and so continued our relationship. After the semester and graduation, beginning of summer, decides she wants to stay together after all. We live together over the summer, then she leaves. After she gets back, she moves in with me, and I get her a job where I work, an inpatient psychiatric facility for children. The job is very difficult and emotionally demanding, so support from who you work with is a must. She really hits it off with her co-workers. We worked on different units. I support her in hanging out with them and going out. It's important to have rapport with co-workers in this job and obviously want her to be happy and have friends. Duh. We both work 2 to 10 PM at this time. Going out was no big deal. But she eventually starts going out with them like every night. I get a job promotion to an office job 8 to 5, and she's sometimes not even home from being out the night before. When I leave for work, I kick her out of the house, but we stay together. I set some boundaries, reminded her I was there when she decided after our break in college that she wanted to get back together right before leaving for a year, which I also waited for her during and supported her. She comes back and blows off set plans we have to go out with her friends and completely disrespects me, my schedule, and my requests. She swears she'll do better and change. A few months go by with a few slip-ups but nothing crazy. Then, my birthday comes around, and we have plans to do lunch before I have a day drinking party with my friends. She's an hour late to lunch because she is dropping all these people off she was partying with the night before at their home/cars, even though they didn't really need rides. Uber. She hadn't slept since the night before, and she shows up to lunch with the clothes she changed into the night before after work to go out. As I said, about an hour late, making me late to my own fucking birthday party with my friends. I went on a 2-week vacation that next day with my dad, came back and broke up with her. She was either so fucking oblivious, self-absorbed, or both. I'm pretty sure it was both. So I was with this girl who was a mother I met in college for a good year. It was a fantastic relationship, and I was really happy. I trusted her a lot, and we had a lot in common. I felt we had a healthy relationship. If we had an issue we'd always bring it up. She forgot to mention the issue of her sleeping with her Romanian friend who was 10 years older than me and married. I guess she met halfway by introducing us a few times and saying how great a friend he was for 3 to 4 months before I found out. I'm not upset though about losing her anymore. No, what makes it hard to sleep at night is her 4-year-old son loved me and never knew his father. I was the closest to a dad he's had. Her family loved me just based on how well I treated that boy. He didn't know what a dad was, and when he wanted to have one he wanted it to be me, and I feel like shit because once she left me, she said I'd still be able to see him. Yet she started ghosting me the next day and said stay away. What bothers me is he loved me unconditionally, and I wish I could show him I tried to be there for him. His mom probably told him I didn't want to be around them anymore, and every time I think about it, it kills me inside. Thank you so much for watching the whole video. Please leave a like and subscribe.